It's all about being a mini detective and having built-in systems to make sure that they're saying what they mean, meaning what they say, and doing what they say they're going to do.
Because procrastination is real.
It's a cardinal feature of all neurodivergence. I'll do it later. And nobody wants to hear that because it often doesn't get done, or it gets
done. Right.
or it gets done last minute and really poor product,
Right.
and nobody's happy. And also that creates stress within the family dynamics. It's all like that.
Welcome to Real Talk with the Parenting Blueprint Coaches, where we discuss all aspects of parenting using the foundation of understanding personality dynamics to raise independent, responsible, and resilient children. My name is Karen Wagner, founder of Teaching Our Youth and the Parenting Blueprint. Let's dig right in with today's topic and have some real talk with the Parenting Blueprint Coaches. So what happens when a neurodivergent child says no to everything? And how do we help them move from resistance to action without conflict? In today's episode, we're sitting down with the incredible Jared Kallen, a dynamic coach who is now going to be joining the Parenting Blueprint team. He specializes in working with neurodivergent youth through a high-trust relationships and playful strategies. Jared's approach isn't about forced compliance. It's about tuning in, getting curious, and finding your child's spark. So whether your child is wired for high energy, deep reflection, or strong independence, this conversation is going to be packed with tools to help them shift from I can't to I will. This is real talk, and we're going to change the way we see your child's potential. Jared, I am so happy to finally have you on here because, with many families that we work with, and as you're seeing in our population, there seems to be just a higher level of neurodivergencies. And coming from the human behavior background, where we see personalities with internal emotional needs that drive external behaviors, I've often seen the correlation of different personality styles, but when those strengths get pushed too far, becomes the blind spot weakness, which puts them on the fringe of neurodiversities. And so I found that there are many strategies that we work with the Parenting Blueprint that are very beneficial. But what I like is that you're going to have a totally different approach on working with the child, not just the parent, in being able to support them. So share a little bit about your approach to coaching neurodivergent youth.
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure. Neurodivergence, I'm going to just say that a lot of things I'm going to say today are not totally generalizable. So I don't want to offend anybody, but these are just in general tools and tips and insights and tricks. So there's no, for example, there's no average ADHDer, for example. But the general approach is that these are youth who have any of these, quote, disabilities have been sort of trained to think that they're dumb or stupid or ineffective or even worse. And so they come often with a lot of baggage, could be years, could even be decades of negative reinforcement. So they may be very apathetic and that's, or more worse. And that's why they're just going to say no to almost anything I might suggest. And so if they say, if I say, they'll say, I'm not going to plan. I don't want to plan. There's no point in planning. And that's part of what I have to do for the executive functioning piece. Then I have to figure out a way to create very strong rapport so they like me, because then they're more prone to do the executive function or to learn it. In particular to the neurodivergent type, they are easily bored and it'll turn off real quickly. So that means that I have to be entertaining, very interactive. So they can't just say, oh, he's boring. So my mind is shutting it down. So it starts with the rapport, because whatever toolkit or tools or thoughts I could provide in terms of guidance will not be taken up unless they really have this positive vibe, engaging. I like you. I got you. I love you no matter what. I don't care what you do. I don't care what you tell me. I've heard everything kind of mentality. Then that will usually lead to better, results with the kid and with the family and with the parents.
It really is about, as I talk about, connection before correction.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you do is there's power in the fun approach that you take because of the energy that you naturally have in your personality to create that connection that in turn creates that trust that will then lead them to progress, right? To make things happen. So you've said that building strong rapport is everything. So In what we shared about personality styles, and I know we're just getting started in that, how do you
Right.
see the personality influencing the way neurodivergent individuals will respond to connection and coaching?
Yeah. Well, so as we were talking about before, most of the neurodivergence that I've ever encountered are fall largely in the dominant sector. And so that means that they're going to be results oriented sometimes, they're going to be direct, they want directness, and they're going to be competitive. And so, so if you're talking about, if you're just going to, you just focus on that piece for a second, then the approach is to be, as I said, be entertaining, be fun, be high energy, laughing, be able to have a good joke. The other part about the rapport is, because this dovetails with this, is, if I find out, I do a lot of research before I take on every client. So if I find out the guy is a star running back at a team, for the first 20 minutes of my first session, I'll play videos of the top NFL running backs of all time, and he's a running back. And so there's this identification that occurs, and we need that identification to create those good vibes or the rapport. And also, as opposed to being bored, they're stimulated now. They're like, "Wow, who is this guy? How does he know I'm a running back? This is an awesome video." It's like sort of the opposite of school without denigrating school. I'm just saying, they're like, "Whoa, I've never had a tutor like this," or whatever. And that's what you want to hit them in between the eyes to a certain extent, to get them going. And then they're a little less likely to do a hard stop no on you if they have the good juju vibes. But then, once you have the rapport, then you go right to what you would counter with, like the dominant. Like, if he's really competitive, you can gamify the situation. You can say, "I'm coaching 4 other dudes like you, and I'm going to track each one of your progress. And whoever wins, over the other 4 is going to get something awesome." And then we might even label what that is, customized to that kid who's going to win. You know, so,
Yes.
so and they like gamify. That's a
Yes.
big, they like, if they think they're alone and isolated in like a silo or on an island, and they're really weird and nothing's gonna ever help. That's not gonna do anything.
No.
But if I say, "Yo, I got 4 of the dudes I'm coaching just like you, and we're doing a gamify," then then they say, "Oh, really? Tell me more about it. How do I win? What do I have to do?" You know.
Yes.
And then the only other thing is, there's a side note, but a lot of kids, as you know, these days, as opposed to maybe our generation, are not nearly as internally rewarded. So you do need the externals sometimes. You do need to say that if you try your best, and I always say try, because that's all they can do. There's no one's perfect, and we're not looking for perfection, and we're not looking for straight A's. We're looking for progress, not perfection. And so, but the whole thing is that you have to get them to try, and getting them to try is by throwing something out there. With some kids, the parents are very involved with me with that. I'll say, like, "What are you willing to get them in 4 months if they show steady progress?" And that'll range all over the map. It could be an Xbox, or it could be a great meal, or or it could be a sports jersey. It doesn't matter. The point is, it's just there as a possible reward.
Right. Right. A goal and something to work towards,
Yeah, just to get them a little more excited, especially if it's something they really want. Then
Yeah.
and then every session you might remind them of that. That if you you're doing great, keep doing it. You're getting that thing. You know,
Yeah. 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 You're almost there. Keep going.
you're almost there.
I
Just keep. Don't go backwards. Don't do that to me. Yeah.
I so appreciate what you're saying. I've talked a lot about my son Kyle, and Kyle's
Yeah.
personality style blend is the dominant and cautious style. And a lot of people had mentioned to me that he did have a lot of ODD tendencies. So the
Mhm,
oppositional defiant, he
mhm,
was no all the time, because in my parenting style, I was telling him what to do. He didn't have a
yeah.
choice, so I got an immediate pushback. So the first thing I needed to do was start offering choices within my boundaries, and then giving him that. But I also had to challenge him with certain things. Like, I remember, now this was probably upper elementary or middle school, to try and keep him motivated to do his work. And I take a look at his math, and I was like, "There's no way you can do those problems. Like, they're really hard problems. I don't even think I could do those problems." He's like, "I
Right.
could do
Right.
those problems." And I said, "You think?" You
Hmm.
think you can get these done? I said, do you think
Yeah.
you can get them done in 20 minutes? He said, I'll have them done in 10. And then I was setting the timer, so it was almost like that reverse psychology. Rather
Yeah.
than pin him down and get it done and nag, 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 I needed
Mm.
to challenge him, make it competitive, like you said. Now, it was
Absolutely.
competitive
Yeah.
with himself, but it was almost that reverse psychology because that's not my natural style. I'm like the Nike swish mom, just do it. And that obviously was not working with him.
Right.
But
Right.
it was
Right.
not only that, but it was the perfectionism that it had to be done right according to him.
Hmm.
His way was the right way, and not everybody saw his way as the right way, but I'll tell you, he would plead his case pretty good as to why, and I had to be
Yeah.
open to another perspective, right? That's how
Absolutely.
we
Yeah.
saw it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And you brought up a good word there, which is sort of choice, because very early on, I try to establish with everybody that everything about life is a choice. So, and they're choosing, not the mom, not the dad, not me, not the teacher, not their grandfather. They are going to choose ultimately, and you can either make better choices or worse choices. But we want to give the kid agency as soon as we can, the sense of agency. Then that negates what they often do, which is blame and shame.
Right.
Go to the external instead of working on me.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And there were things I had to let him fail, but I mean, there were times I did,
Yeah.
he did have to fail a
Right.
class. I needed to let him experience the logical consequences for his choices. And I
Mhm.
tell parents rather than be mad, be sad. Be sad and not mad, be
Right.
sad. I'm sorry you went through that. How did that make you feel? What do you think you could have done differently next time? Do you want a couple of suggestions? Like I just had to approach it from a different, not me putting blame and shame on him and the guilt trip, because I
Right.
think deep down they know.
Yeah.
And if
Hmm.
we do the guilt, then for some odd reason, Jared, when I had done that, because I'm not saying I didn't, because it was a learning process for me, it
Yeah.
ended up being my fault, and I was like, wait, no, wait a
Yeah.
minute, how does this table turn that now it's my fault, right? So there were some strategies that I just needed to adapt in parenting him according to his design. So when we go, you say from I can to I will. So in your work, you talk about helping clients make that shift from I
Yeah.
can to I will. So what role does recognizing the client or the child's natural strength and behavioral tendencies play in you guiding them to making that shift possible?
Well, I can answer that really in the context of neurodivergent people,
Yeah.
where because most of the people I'm talking to can do whatever task we're talking about, or whatever chore, or meet any goal. They also tend to be very non-committal, and that's why usually I say, "Can you do X?" And they say, "I can do that," and then I say, "Will you do it?" Just like that, you know, and there's usually a pause on the other end, and they think about it, and they know what I'm doing, and then they say, "I will do it." But it's sort of like a concession, All right, I'll do it. It's sort of like grab me by the arm. All right, I'll do it. It's just like when I'm in the middle of a session with a kid, and we have really poor grades or something, or a lot of confusion about an assignment or something. He said, "Oh, yeah, I really need to talk to that teacher tomorrow about this and get this cleared up." I say, "No, we're going to email a teacher right now. If you need help, I'll help you." Because again, with this population, if they say I'm going to do it later, it will not get done. So you have to grab them and say, "Do it right now. If you need help, I'll help you." And then let me know when it's sent and BCC me so I can trust and verify. It's all about being a mini detective and having built in systems to make sure that they're saying what they mean, meaning what they say, and doing what they say they're going to do. If that
Because
makes sense.
procrastination is real.
It's a cardinal feature of all neurodivergence. I'll do it later. And nobody wants to hear that because it often doesn't get done,
It's
or it
not
gets
going to get done. Right.
or it gets done last minute and really poor product,
Right.
and nobody's happy. And also that creates stress within the family dynamics. It's all like
Right.
that.
And then
Procrastinate.
and then having you do what you said in doing it with them together, it's almost
Yeah.
like teaching them. And I had to do those things with my kids too, just to it was almost like passing the baton. I'll do it with
Yeah.
you this time, but then you'll know how to do it the next time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they are unsure. We may give blank statements to kids, and it's so broad that sometimes, as you talk about with executive function, they don't know how to break it up
Right. Right.
into sizable nuggets. And
Right.
so we're assuming that their brain is wired that way, and it's not. And
Right.
so we can't assume that. We may have to, what do you think you might need to do first?
You have
I
to
would ask my
you
kids,
have
what do you think we need to do first?
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
get their insights.
You
And
could,
if I
yeah.
don't know, I get an I don't know. And I said, well, can I make a suggestion of where you might want to start? So now we're communicating and collaborating, and I'm
Mhm,
just not assuming that they know
mhm,
or being negative or derogatory in my
yeah.
tone that they
Right.
don't know. It's like we're working together. And I found that with my
Right.
kids that once we were able to do it together, then they knew how to do it the next time
Right.
without assuming that
Right.
they know. Yeah.
Right. Well, you bring up a good word there, which is we, because my coaching and a lot of other people who are trying to help, you have to approach it from the we. It's not like I versus you, or I'm going to do this and then you're going to do that. Although that's part of it. Like, because my company's called Action Pack Coaching for a reason. I want action, but we sort of have to agree on stuff.
Yeah.
You know, we can't just,
That's right.
like, to your point, you can't order them around. You have to say, all right, if I do X and can you do Y?
Right.
Can we revisit and
Right.
see what happened, trial and error. But the other thing is if you think about anybody, any group in the history of America, in the world, that has been put down or ostracized or discriminated against, which are neurodivergent people by definition, at some point in their life, and some school system or some teacher got them really bad. And so the only way to combat that, at least in terms of my coaching, is by focusing on the we. Like, what we got to do now is pick up these grades. How are we going to do that? How are we going to create a better planning system that you're actually going to stick to, and not just people please and say, yes, I'll do it, but then don't do it.
Right. Right.
Uh, so the we is really important. And I do that as much as I can. And also, and this is something you do a lot with your son, Kyle, is you bring it back to yourself. So again, they feel less strange, less weird, less unique.
Mhm.
Like, I have the same problems you do. They're just in different areas,
Yep.
you know,
Oh
um,
gosh, yes.
you
Yeah.
know, or, I was depressed for a long time. I know what it feels like.
Yeah.
Instead of, having a kid sort of leave my office one day saying, I'm sort of saying maybe what could have been done better after I already applauded them on a bunch of other things. And then their retort was, yeah, but I have autism, as if it's a complete pass. And then sometimes I have to say, oh, I have to say, oh, well, that's sort of ridiculous because I have diabetes. And if I just said, well, I'm obese because I have diabetes, or I don't take my insulin as prescribed because of my diabetes, I show them my insulin pen. I say, I need to use this every, 4 times a day. So, and do I have a right to, like, get sick and then become a burden to my family or my wife or my kids or my grandparents? No, I don't have that right, and nor do you. You can't blame anything on this whole disease that you have or don't have, or what level or whatever. You have to say, I'm autistic or I have ADHD, and I still can do these things. It's not like an either or black and white world, which is where many of their minds inhabit. It's
Yeah.
it's there's no gray. It's either yes or no. You're nice, or you're not nice. That's it's sort of, and you have to try to get them a little more in the gray. You know, so they don't come on the screen one day and say, I'm a complete failure. I didn't do anything the whole week. Like, is that really true? I think you probably did a few good things.
Right.
Yeah.
So take them from victim mentality to victor mentality. And
Yeah.
I can see that. And I've seen that in kids because they have low self-esteem, because they don't feel as though they're achieving. They can do the comparison trap as they look at what other people do that they
Mhm.
may not feel, but not
Yep.
necessarily recognizing what their strengths are and what they
Right.
do. So
Right.
we talk
And so,
about
I'm sorry, to that point, is what's very important is that positive reinforcement is
yeah,
is always what wins the day. And parents need to hear this too. Everyone needs to hear it, because and studies have been shown that this is true. That if somebody underperforms, then usually leaders of those people, for example, like in corporations and stuff, some of them will slam into them. Way better. You messed up. What were you thinking? Well, and it gets serious and heavy, right? Instead, the better CEOs and the better leaders, they are more loving and warm, and they just deliver the message, I think you can do better. Do
right.
you think you can do better? And then they say, yeah, I can do better. And then you leave it there.
Yeah.
It's sort of like less is more.
Yes. Yeah. One of the strategies that we share, now this is even a corporate strategy, but it works in families as well, is affirm the positive and
Hmm.
then ask, do you think there's anything you could have done better? And
Hmm.
if they get unsure, then, and if you would like to share, I always say, ask permission. Could I make
Mm-hmm.
a suggestion? Would it be okay if I made a suggestion? And
Yeah.
when I went to that approach, rather than just pushing my opinion, and I
Mm-hmm.
say, could I make a suggestion? If they
Mm-hmm.
say yes, they're ready to receive what I have to say. Now,
Mm-hmm.
Kyle would say, no. I
Mm-hmm.
make a
Right.
suggestion. He's like, no. And
Right.
then he'd come back an hour later, but he'd come back an hour later and say, what do you got?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it had to be on his terms, right? So as much as I wanted to tell him and I thought it would help him, I couldn't keep pushing, because the more I pushed, then he'd become what?
Right.
Defensive, right? And
Right.
so I had to let it go. We have to
Right.
have
Right.
conversation about that, and then just let it go. And that, but he would come back and say, what do you got? Because he's thinking and processing that maybe it could have been a better way. And maybe with his executive function, he wasn't quite sure what he
Mm-hmm.
could have done. Maybe he did,
Yeah.
maybe he didn't, but where other students would be like, sure, and they're open to receive, and we can go right into that communication and collaboration. But with
Right.
neurodiverse kids, the first thing you're going to get is that no.
Yeah. 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 Well,
So let that go, let them
Yeah.
come back, or
Yeah.
let them experience the consequences. So when we talk about,
Oh, I got to jump in for one quick second.
sure.
So along this whole we concept and the concept of agency and choice,
Yeah.
and that it's up to them to make better or worse choices, and they can learn and they can grow in that area. Sometimes the way we even phrase things or the tone is incredibly important. So instead of saying you need to do this or this is really bad or whatever, no, that doesn't come out. Instead, I'll just say something like, in this situation, if I were you, I would do
Mhm.
X rather than Y. And then I tell them what a lot of neurodivergents need to hear, which is the why. Why would I choose one over the other? Because the super logical ones, they were like, I want to know why before I even put any effort into that. Why?
Exactly.
And that so if you take a person who is refusing to practice on their SAT ACT preparation and they're dominant, you have to explain the why. If you get a better score, then you have a greater chance of getting into the college of your choice. Then you might make more money. Everything might really be beautiful, or something like that. If you do
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
sort of your why.
Right.
Like, or you can go the opposite way and say, well, if you choose not to do any more test prep or practicing, and you get a lower score than you could have, and you get rejected from that school, how will you feel? And
Right.
think it through, think the tape through. What would be the negative consequences? How would you feel? Like, what would happen?
And weighing out the pros and cons with them. And
Yeah,
again, letting them choose. Oh my gosh,
and
these are so
choose.
many strategies I had to use with Kyle. Boy, that boy was a piece of work.
Yeah, I know.
He still is. I love him dearly, but I understand him now, Jared. In the
Yeah, I
beginning,
know.
I just thought he was just strong-willed, defiant, anti everything, and I
Yeah,
just, it really wasn't until I understood the disc model that I could truly see that this was his personality traits. Were there some excesses in certain areas? Yes, they were. But in
mhm,
my parenting, I had to kind of set those boundaries in what I call the pruning.
mhm,
Discipline is a discipline of self-discipline. So I needed to
mhm,
teach him the discipline of being self-disciplined in certain ways,
mhm,
that you can't
mhm.
blurt out and you can't curse at people. Like you can't, you need to be willing to hear someone else's side, or you're not going to have any friends, I mean,
Yeah,
and
right.
there were some logical consequences that he would experience. Like he would, when he was younger, he'd have friends come over and he just wanted to game, but he didn't want to game with them. He wanted them to watch him game. And next thing I know, they're shooting hoops with his brother out in the driveway. And he's like, he steals my friends. And I said, because you don't play with them,
Right. Well, that happened. Yeah.
what was the logical consequence of that? So maybe we do a two-player game when they come over. Like
Right.
he was
Right.
having to experience those types of things. And
Right.
what we talk about in parenting by design is that it's not a one size fits all approach. And
Right.
you
Right.
do the same thing.
Oh,
So
totally. Yeah.
yeah, so could you share an example of how you tailor strategies based on
Yeah.
some neurodiverse needs?
Yeah. Yeah. So a good example is, for example, a family hires me to get their ADHD kid better at writing, just writing. Now, usually, generalizing here, the kids are either cannot write, don't like to write, or refuse to write. So those are all pretty bad. So, and that's why I'm getting hired, right? So basically, but on the first session, the kid might say, I hate school. I'm not going to college. So why on earth would I need to know how to write? So now you have to have the why, and that dovetails with really having good rapport and customizing to the kid, because I said, well, okay, I just dropped everything there. And I just said, what do you do with most of your time? And he goes, oh, all my time is on selling sneakers on the sneaker stock market. I said, whoa, that's pretty interesting. I've never heard of that. And so all we did was sort of reverse engineer a situation. And all I said was, I gave him the same writing strategy I would give anyone, like someone who was more pro school or pro academic. But I said, you're going to use the same strategy and you're going to explain to me how the sneaker stock market works and how people can benefit from it, how you work it, how you've worked it. You're customizing it to the kid. And then, and in this particular kid and case, he said, I can do that. I'll do that. I'll write, and so now you're customizing a tried and true strategy in writing, whether it's ACE, Answer Side Explain, or Fix, or any of these strategies. But you have to be willing to say, forget school for a minute. Just let's work on something to get the skills rolling. To get the, so that's a good example of customizing. There are other ways where, somebody will say, someone will say, in terms of executive functioning, I'm not going to plan. Don't make me plan. Don't ask me to plan. I don't want a planner. I tried it many times before. I usually lose the planner. Right. So then you can just talk about, okay, I got you, and then you just talk about planning, but you try to show in one way or another how better planning will lead to a better, happier life, instead of just something you have to do. Mm-hmm. So if you have good rapport, you can just say, like, if you had more time to do what you like to do, would you be happier? Then they say, yes. Hell yeah, of course. Right. Mm-hmm. So then you say, well, if you can manage your time better. So, when you have to be doing, chunking out your work, when you have to be playing lacrosse, when you have to be at dinner with your parents on a Saturday, then where your pockets of time are, whether it's for studying or seeing your girlfriend or going to the frat party or whatever. So it actually benefits you, even though you don't want to do it and you don't see it or you don't feel like it, or it takes a little extra effort. You actually, short-term pain, long-term gain. Yeah. That's what we're talking.
Yes. Oh gosh, did I experience that whole time management piece in the planner. The kids had planners and they just weren't using them. And then things were all over the place. So like you, I really had to sell the benefit of using the planner and time management. And I had to have consequences when the planner wasn't used. It's like no tiki, no washi, you know what I mean? You don't have a planner filled in, then you don't get games. It was off the game system that day. And it was my son, Eric. Kyle was a little bit more structured and organized. Eric was much more relational. So he was all about the people and sports, but wasn't task driven. He wasn't. Mm-hmm. So He was starting to slip, as smart as he was, because he wasn't organized. And rather than be critical of why aren't you organized like your brother, Jared, he had like a binder check. And he got 10 points because his name was on the binder, but there was nothing in the binder because everything was in the pockets, right? Everything was in the pockets. And so I was like, that was like an easy A, like what the heck? So we sat down and we sorted out the pages, we hole punched and we put them where they were. And I told him, if you keep putting stuff in the pockets, I'll get an X-Acto knife and cut the pockets out. And then you're going to have to put them where they belong. Like I had to kind of force that discipline because there was an easy A. Point, right? And it was just like, what is happening here? But that's not a natural skill set for him. It's not a natural skill set. So I needed to do what? Show him, not tell him. What it to look like. And then help him maintain it until I could let go and he already had it. And he's good.
Yeah, but you brought up a really important word there just a second ago, Karen, which is consequences. Mm-hmm. And actions have consequences, and lack of actions have consequences.
They do.
And and this relates to the whole parenting blueprint and how to deal with parents, because, and I say that in a good way, but there are many parents who ask for guidance from me and then they don't follow through, or they fall through halfway. And this is not a knock against parents. It's just a problem that we have to be aware of. Then I'll find out. So I make a clear agreement with the parent, like stop doing X or do more Y, whatever it is. Doesn't matter, because we're promoting different kinds of behaviors, whether it's executive function or better hygiene or better conditioning for an athlete or whatever. It's all over the place, or just getting himself out of bed by himself. instead of having mom knock on the door 7 times. And then they're all late. The whole family's late for everything. So instead, it basically problem is that the parents must be disciplined too
I know.
for us to have a win-win-win. Because and the problem is I often find out, like, could be 3 weeks later or even 3 months later, that something we agreed upon has not been going on inside the house. So, so a perfect example of that is a lot of kids are addicted to iPhones. We know that's a huge problem. Video game addiction, iPhones, always looking at Snapchat, Instagram, not good if you want to grow. With one mom, we isolated that from the beginning because I got that from the email intake. Like, he's addicted to his phone. It's a real problem, right? And so mom agreed to reverse the paradigm. And so when the kid came home, 10th grader comes home, she would take the phone and say, "You'll get it right back after you show me you've done all your work." I said, "This is perfect. This should work. This should work, or it's got a good shot at working." Then, a month or two later, I'm sitting with the kid, and the kid says, "I said, so how's that iPhone thing working? You're still doing all the work first, then getting an iPhone?" He said, "Well, actually, after every 15 minutes, she gives me the phone. Then she takes it away. Then do another 15 minutes. And what we all know about." Focus and concentration is
right?
not so good. You're going back and forth.
Exactly.
And so even though the mom totally loves her son and even hired me, right, that we're still getting in the way of actually not conforming to what we know about how the brain works and when they're trying to learn, focus.
Absolutely.
So, if you're doing abrupt ins and outs and lighting up the brain with video, and then going back to math, which is more boring for most people, then you have sometimes a letdown in performance. So you can see how it goes both ways. That we can hurt ourselves or we can help ourselves. Right. We can hurt our kids or we can help our kids.
Yeah.
Sort of, it's tricky. I tell a lot of people I feel like I'm really a mini detective. Because like I have
uncovering things.
Yeah.
That no one wants to talk about.
Because some things just don't sound right. Like,
right.
Like I have a kid. One thing that differentiates me from almost every other coach out there is that I have my each client text me every day with their plan for the day. So we're trying to build in structure, and it's not punitive or anything. It's just for the kids who have no plan. That's really good because that means, I have to create a plan. But the thing is that a kid that I'm coaching who is a senior at Harvard, majoring in math right now and has ADHD, he texts me on a Wednesday, with regard to this texting. He says, I've been in the library, I've studied for 4 hours, I did the review sheet, et cetera. Then on Friday, he texts me, I got a D-. So I text him right back. I say, okay, there's just a few things that might be happening here. Either you lied and you didn't study 4 hours, or you were in the library for hours, but you only did the problems you knew how to do and you avoided the problems that you did not know how to do, or all three. And they usually say all three.
Oh, you call them out. Yeah. Which one was it? Oh, all of them, right? Yeah.
That's the detective part. And then the other part is sort of what you said about always just saying, how can we avoid this in the future? What would you do differently specifically? Yep. To do, would you have met with the professor at office hours? Yep. Would you have made yourself do more math problems so you could show your work better? Yeah. Would you have gone to the library without the phone or turned the phone off in the library until you were done your work?
Right.
The answer there would have been no, but the answer the next time, the next big math test is yes. The other reason this has relevance is because in college, as you know, sometimes you only have 2 major assessments that comprise your entire grade versus high school.
Right. Absolutely.
So if they sort of lose their focus and other things just before the midterm and the final of a math, or 2 research papers in an English or humanities class, we get bad. It's bad.
It's not good. It is. My daughter experienced some of that as well. And it was the same thing, the high school to college transition, because they're not collecting the homework. So she wasn't doing it. And then she failed the test. And I was like, so what do you think happened? And she said, well, they weren't, she was honest about it. They weren't checking it. So I didn't do it. So you weren't practicing,
Right. Right,
And
exactly.
so what do you think we need to do next time? She needed to take the class again. And then when she did, Jared, and got a 50 out of 50, man, she was like screenshotting it. It was on the refrigerator.
Yeah,
And I
of
said, so what
course.
did you do differently? And she said, I did the practice problems. But,
Right.
so it's just guiding them through, letting her fail. She had experienced that failure
Yep,
and
yep.
not be mad, be sad, that didn't feel
Right,
good. I
right.
got to do it again. But what do you think you want to do differently? Because, yeah, she wasn't getting the credit. So why should I do it? She didn't like math. She didn't
Okay.
like it, so she didn't do it. It was that procrastination, that avoidance, but you still need that credit to get out. So how do we work with that? And
Yeah.
allowing them to experience that, coming up with it on their own terms, but as you said, holding them accountable.
But
So
you just brought up a really very important issue as it relates to neurodivergence, because a lot of those types of ADHDers, et cetera, they will only do what they're interested in.
yeah, oh, absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
and that's
Yeah.
why at first my approach is engaging, interactive. Wake them
Right.
up, get them excited, get them stimulated with those, videos of running backs. It was
Yep.
my example from earlier, but it could be anything: ballet,
Right.
music, piano playing,
Yep.
lacrosse, swimming, ice hockey. But the thing is that you have to answer that why, especially for the dominance. Like, why should I do the work or whatever? And then you have to give them the reason. You have to play the tape through. If you don't do it, what happens? Or you do the, if I were you, I would think about that because, you know, and then sometimes you just have to shut up. Like, you have to shut up and listen.
Yep. And let them go.
Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. So many lessons along the way. So Jared, in wrapping up, what advice
Yeah.
would you give parents who are trying to balance
Hmm.
structure, flexibility, and the personality differences? Because our parenting kind of dictates our personality kind of dictates our parenting style as well. So if we want to balance that structure, flexibility, the personality differences while we're supporting a neurodivergent child,
Yeah.
what practical tips would you have? Just a
Yeah.
couple, because the parents, if you want to learn more, if you have a neurodivergent child, and Jared is new to our team, he may
Mhm.
be the coach for you. Okay, so what would be some practical tips that you could just share with them now?
There are a bunch, just real quick. One is, you have to make your expectations, parental expectations, very clear, and they probably have to go be recorded on a piece of paper and be central in the home or something like that, so that there's no confusion and it's complete clarity of what is expected. And that is also important because if they don't do what is expected, you don't have to have a negotiation or discussion with your kid. It's already on. It's like, no, you're not getting your iPhone because look at the list. The other thing that a lot of parents could do better or could focus on is holding the line. So, any subject, once they've stated the expectation, et cetera, if they're not met, whatever, hold the line. Do exactly what you said you would do. Don't deviate and be consistent. Consistency is key. Yeah, so that's really, those are huge ones. The only other thing is, well, there's two other things that come to mind. One is you sometimes have to take a time out if things get too heated. But you don't understand me. I'm not doing it anyway. I don't care about Jared. I don't care about anything. I don't care about high school. I'm going nowhere. I'm a failure. You know,
Mm,
time out. But only take a time out if you're committed to revisiting it at some point soon.
right.
And then the last thing, and this is very central to neurodivergence, is parents should also find ways, and many do already, a lot do, of having fun with their kid as they define fun. So that, again, it's the we instead of the I versus you.
Mhm.
Like, aren't we having fun now? We're at your favorite event. We're at a ball game, or we're on a carnival ride or whatever. So we're not talking about your whatever your faults are, or your disabilities, or your ADHD, or how you never remember to submit your work. We're talking about, whoa, this is fun.
Yeah, connect with them on their level. I remember Kyle was very big into D&D, and he probably still is. And so I was curious. And so we sat down and he was trying to explain it to me, and I had some cards or what. I had a headache just trying to follow the complexity
Yeah,
of this game that
yeah,
they play for hours. I mean, that's when I started to realize that he is a
yeah,
highly intelligent strategist. That
yeah,
is not my strength. I'm probably more relational, where he is a deep thinker.
yeah.
And he was going to blow me out of the water. You know what I
But,
mean? And I felt like he was going to set me up to lose anyway. But I mean, it
but,
was
but to your
to
point,
value and appreciate that in him,
yeah,
right?
but to your point, that's when you and myself as coaches and facilitators when you recognize a strength in anyone, then you just turn the tables around and say, coach me on that. I don't know anything
Right.
about that.
Right.
Coach me. I want to learn about that.
Yeah.
Sneaker stock market, never heard of it in my life. I'd love to. Can I make money doing it? What's going on here?
Tell me more. Tell me more. And then it
more.
validates them for who they
Oh,
are in
yeah.
their strength, especially when they feel as though they're failing in other areas. Because
Well, and
I truly believe
right.
in that neurodivergency is a strength that
Yes.
is powerful, can be
Very powerful.
powerful if used in the right way.
Especially if there's a power imbalance in any relationships.
Yeah.
If you turn it on and say, I know nothing, like I'm a 0 and you're 100,
Yeah.
teach me.
Yeah.
They usually don't even skip a beat. They're like, oh, this is how this works. This is how this works.
Exactly. Exactly. And he would just read the books. I mean, he just would go through all the books and setting up campaigns. And these guys would set up, they'd be at my house for a weekend, Mountain Dew and pizza rolls. You know what I'm saying? And that's what they did. But that was their thing. I would hear them talking, and it was a totally different language to me. But I just wanted to celebrate, lean into it, and not because it wasn't what I did, be negative about it. Where Eric was playing every sport, I say Kyle was a mental challenge and Eric was a physical challenge. You know what I mean? Like he liked to challenge himself mentally, where Eric liked to challenge himself physically. And it's not right or wrong, it's different. But see, I connected more with the physical challenge of sport because that's what I knew.
Right.
So as a mom, I feel as though I probably missed windows to lean into that in the beginning because it was dark. It was different. I didn't understand it until I said, if I want to connect with him, I need to connect with him at his level. And so, Jared, this was great conversation, great insights. I'm so excited that we had this conversation. There are more and more parents that are starting to see various tendencies coming up with their children. Some of them are more severe. Others are a little bit more mild. That I truly believe that what we have to offer, not only with the parenting blueprint for parents, but the strategies that you bring in recognizing in that child how we can motivate them is going to be just a beautiful transformational program for families. So I'm so excited. So do you have any last minute closing thoughts before we go?
The last thought is really when it comes down to it that it's just like my taglines are a few of them. But one of them is let's get the work done or the stuff done and then have fun, and in that order. So that now that's attacking procrastination and other things. Get the work done first, then have as much fun as you want. Have more fun than you ever thought you could have, right? And then the only other thing is the sort of curse of this whole sector, which is if nothing changes, then nothing changes. So the more like if a parent spots a kid that may have neurodivergent tendencies that are not serving the kid well, get them earlier, not later, because it's not going to change until they can't. It's not their fault. Their brains are not formed like a normal person. So they need possibly medication plus coaching or toolkit, and then we're good.
And hopefully. Then strategies. Parents need strategies. It's not a one size fits all approach, because what I needed to do with Kyle was different than what I needed to do with Eric, who was not as organized, and Anna, who second guessed everything.
Every kid is different, and you can never. You have to be, you and me, we have to be ultra flexible.
Yeah.
Because, you'll never usually be shocked because you've seen so much, or I've seen so much of it, but the response has to relate basically on what we know after customizing what we know about the kid and our approach, and also things like this, like, oh, this kid will not respond if I beg him to do something. I'll say, get it done. Come on, don't fool around this time.
It's direct. Yeah. Yeah. And that was a term, like I said, with Kyle, if I was not direct, he didn't think I meant it.
Right.
But if I had that same tone with the other kids, they would have thought that I was mean or harsh, and they would just back away from me. So,
right. But the only other thing I'll leave you with is the we is so important. And that just means me and you and collaboration with other therapists and with the parents. Like it takes a village, according to
does. It truly does.
So the thing is that it's, the more information and free flow of information as the coaching is going along is great, because you're not with the kid in the house. So you got to know, like, what happened? Did he check out? Why did he check out? What happened before he checked out? Oh, there was a fight. How did it start? What was it about? Who was right? What do you make? How do you make sense of it? And then that's also when the parenting blueprint can come in, because you can say, all right, well, if this ever happens again, you know what not to do. Now let's explore what to do.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Jared, this was an amazing talk. I want to
Okay.
thank you for joining me today. Those of you who are interested in learning more about Jared, there will be some links underneath. You'll also find more information coming soon on our website where you can find more information about how you can meet with Jared, follow him, and then learn more about his program for parents and neurodiverse kids. So, Jared, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone, if you like this episode, click like, share it with a friend, because I think so many parents are going through this and they feel maybe siloed, isolated on an island, and not really having effective strategies, and someone like you, Jared, that can really guide them through so that they can reduce that conflict, increase the productivity, and have the relationships they desire with their kids. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Have
We'll
a
see
great
y'all
day.
next time.